Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am back tonight with my good friend Chris
Hello.
and with Nate.
How do you do?
And we are getting together tonight to talk about the short story One Bright Star to Guide Them by John C. Wright. Um, and if you haven't read the story, I suspect our conversation is going to be kind of hard to follow. So it's not long. And if you'd like to go read the story, I will put a link to the Amazon page in the description. You can go buy it for, I believe it's $3 right now. And you can read that and then come back and enjoy our talk. Um, as well, like I've said before, if you like my channel, if you like what I do here, these discussions, my poetry performances, or my political cultural commentary, please consider supporting me by visiting subscribestar.com/zachlog-the-great. And having said that, I think I'm gonna open it up for Chris. Would you like to be the first to give your thoughts about the story?
Okay. So I did enjoy it. It was kind of weird though, because it was one of those things where it doesn't feel like it was aimed at me because I haven't read any of the Narnia books. I'm vaguely familiar with them, but it feels like that's kind of a necessary prerequisite. I feel like I got enough from it, but I feel like there would have been so much more I could have gotten from it if I was familiar with those. But overall, it was a lot of fun. An interesting premise that I don't think I've seen before, but it was executed well. So surface level, I enjoyed it, but I feel like if I would have had more familiarity with the sort of source materials, I could have probably enjoyed it a lot more.
It yes, one thing about that. Oh, there it is. Uh the most obvious parallel, especially to most people today, I think, is C.S. Lewis's Narnia books. However, where is it? Here, please. Ah, good. I have it right here. Um, on his blog, Mr. Wright actually says, points out that there are several books of a similar nature that he kind of drew on and was referring to. And he says, let's see, Weirdstone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner, Carbonell by Barbara Slay, The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander, um, The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper, Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, and Red Moon and Black Mountain by Joy Chant. Which I've read a few of those, and I think I'm going to have to read some of the others to just to see how they are, because I mean they're in good company. I can definitely say that much. Um, but yeah, how about you, Nate? What are your opening thoughts here?
This reads like the sort of the cliff notes of a really, really interesting saga. I want the book about what happened before, because when you're just going in there slinging all this stuff at Richard, he's like, "Come on, man, you got to bear the sword again, like you did when we did this awesome thing, or fought this crazy sounding battle, or stood off this amazing villain, or dared danger in this crazy neat sounding place." I'm like, "Hey, I want that book. That book sounds awesome."
I Yeah, I kind of see that. At the same time, you
Also, when the
know
guy sold his soul, he became a leftist, and that made me laugh.
that too. Yes. At the same time, like, one of the things, I think part of the point of this is we have a lot of books like that, but we don't have so many that take some of the same assumptions and try to apply that to a more grown up kind of setting. And so seeing, I think, like I actually wrote a review of this where I said he kind of takes the emotional association of these other stories, and he uses that as a structure to build this other thing on top of them, which you could kind of call that cheating. At the same time, I think this is a good story, and I'm glad I didn't have to wait for him to write all the other stories to get to this one.
No, this seems like a killer outline. I'm like, yeah.
So you want to see the full novel scale version of this, is what you're saying?
Yeah, like I want like the full chat series here. I want to hear about him like, dealing with the faceless warlock and having to fight off fight alongside the one good werewolf and all of that stuff and the chick with the eel for a head. Don't remember what that was about.
At the same time, I feel like the fact that we don't know those stories in a way kind of helps, because it seems to be the sort of trope where as you leave the full world, you start to forget even existed. So in a way, like a lot of the characters, it seems like there's a moment for each of them where they almost have to struggle to remember that anything had actually happened.
Yeah, and it's also so the most obvious parallel to Narnia, four children in England go into this fantasy world and have to fight off this terrible evil and save the world basically. And one thing I thought was really interesting, and I've actually I wrote up a few notes on all of this because it has there are four of them. There's Tommy, Richard, Sally, and Penny, and like they have the I don't. I feel like if I could piece this out, like there is some meaning here, and I don't know what it is, but like Tommy was the one who had the key. And Tommy stayed faithful, and he was the one who was trying to pull everyone back together. Richard had the sword, and he ended up in a complete betrayal. He ended up, actively siding with the enemies that they had fought in the past. Sally had the shard of the mirror, the magical mirror, and she kind of retreated into memories and fear. And then Penny had the book, the magical book, and she died. And I feel like there's some kind of I don't know, there's some kind of symbolism, some kind of meaning going on with the different roles and what happened to them, but I don't know what it is.
I mean, each one of them lived up to it. Like, Tommy had locked up his heart, and locked up his childhood and gone been a very serious businessman. But he could also, it could be unlocked and he could, transit back to that other space. Richard had a double-edged sword and was one himself. He was a hero, but he also had within him the seeds of villainy because he had a thirst for power. The girl with the shard of the mirror was herself broken and became a coward. Just by, seeing the evil rising, she couldn't stand. And then the one who could see the future was sent away was sent off to the undiscovered country, where all the seeing, you can do isn't going to help anybody because, well, you're dead. So I'm like, that's actually a very deft sort of thing that I think was done here.
Well, and even though she's dead, she contributes more to the side of good than the other two that were still alive.
Yep.
It's another thing. I think it's kind of weird for me because this is I don't know how much you two got to read this. I read this twice since we started setting this up and planning this, and I'd read it at least twice before. And so I don't know how much of that is because I know where everything is going, but it's like it's almost too obvious some of the symbolism to me now he does with the settings. Because like when you first in the first chapter you meet Tommy, and Tommy is caught between the Church of St. George, who is the patron saint of England. He's caught between the Church of St. George and these stuffy square office buildings. And he goes from every morning he goes to work and he leaves St. George behind him, but he always comes back home towards St. George. And then you have Richard, who is when you meet him, he's in this enormous rich fancy office surrounded by books that no one reads and art that no one wants to look at, which is like modern, so much of modernity, books that no one's going to read and art that no one feels like taking the time to look at. And
that's it. And it's not just that they're books nobody's going to read, it's that they are explicitly there because they're the right kind of books. They're the kind of books that a learned man would have. But the thing is that you only become a learned man for having the books if you have read them. Simple possession of the information does not mean that you know it.
And then Sally is in the middle of this, broken down neighborhood, and she's got just this one little her yard and her house is neat and decorated and pretty, but it's just this one little area and it doesn't touch anything else outside of it, and it's also stale and kind of dead
and very fragile.
Yeah, like one wrong move and you set off a cascade of broken glass.
But what was what else? I think one of my one thing I really liked and again, I don't know. Sometimes it seems almost like hitting you over the head with some of this, but his description of after having his eyes opened and he sees the school teacher in front of this classroom of young children, and this school teacher is casting these spells of lies on the children to dull their minds and steal hope and freedom from them and put them in these chains. And I'm just like, yeah, that sounds about like what's going on these days.
Well, we never claimed it was a subtle story. It was just a good one.
Yeah. Have either of you read the Out of the Space trilogy by C.S. Lewis, by the way?
I have not. I don't think I've read any of his fiction. I've read some of his other stuff, like Mere Christianity, The Four Loves, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, and the other thing from chapter 2 that really struck me was when Richard is going on about like how we need to join with this spirit of wisdom and life and power, and it's just like, wow, this sounds very much like Weston from Perelandra. They're not nearly as well known as the Narnia books or Screwtape Letters, but the Space trilogy by C.S. Lewis is also really, really good reading. It's Out of the Silent Planet, Perelandra, which I think is the best one, and That Hideous Strength, which I believe TV tropes would call darker and grittier. The other thing I thought was funny, and I don't know how intentional this one when he talks about seeing the corporate logo on Richard's building. You know what? I should find that spot. Well, he describes it as being like a. Let's see. I should be able to find this. Come on, wake up. I should have bookmarked this. Here we go. Wait, we're getting there. Go to chapter 2.
I found it. Let's see. I would be more surprised if I had not seen the hex written into your corporate logo. Yes, I saw the witch writing there. That is Melusine, is it not?
The sea queen whose legs are 2 sea serpents. And I saw that. I'm like, am I the only one who sees the Starbucks logo there with the woman with the well, it's
yeah.
Yes, it's
Not a mermaid, a siren specifically. Meant to lure you to your doom.
luring you to your doom by sounding too beautiful to turn away from. Also, and so a very particular kind of poison there. I don't know whether he chose that one on purpose, but the other moment from chapter 2 I really liked. What is it? Tommy turns with the key and tries to disenchant Richard, and he's like, "Dang it! I thought that would work." And he says, "Can I not free him without his consent?" And you can't help people who don't want to be helped.
Well,
you can't help people who don't know they need help. And if they actively enjoy the thing they need to be helped by and need to be helped out of, yeah, no. It ain't happening.
And the interesting thing was he couldn't unlock Richard, but he could lock him down more, it seemed like.
Well, and that was because he was what he was doing there is he's saying he said that the chains that were already there he would tighten and lock them, and so in trying to free him he was opposing the choices that that Richard had actively made. In binding him further, he's basically just kind of enforcing the consequences. He's saying, okay, this is what you chose. Now you find out what it means. And it's...
it reminds me of the times where it says, like, the Lord gave them over to their lusts. And said, I gave you a chance to repent. You didn't. So go ahead, do that. And you're going to run headfirst into destruction.
Well, like yeah, it's a few weeks ago we talked about the city of brass, and what was it? It was and it ceased, and God granted them all things for which they had striven, and the heart of a beast in the place of a man's heart was given. And it's like, at some point, God says, okay, this is what you chose. This is what you want. Here you go. And it's another one of those things that it's kind of frightening because it's like, I make mistakes. I make some of the same stupid mistakes over and over. And, is it possible I'm going to reach that point? God says, okay, that's what you want. You have it. We're done.
And by the same token, like if you look at it through the Christian perspective like that, well, Jesus has the key and he's trying to free us, but we have to consent in order to be freed.
Yep.
What was and so the third chapter where he gets a closer look at, there's Kick Toad and the eel lady and the werewolf boy, and it's I thought one kind of fun, interesting thing about that, and this is kind of another parallel to the Narnia books. It says that he says at one point that Penny never trusted Kick-Toad, and uh, it was and it turned out Penny was entirely right in that in the long run, and it actually reminded me a little bit of the Narnia books because Lucy, who was the youngest of them, several times she would see things that she's trying to tell the others. She was kind of a little bit the prophet of the group, you could say, and she couldn't always get everyone to go to listen to her, and it just seemed like another kind of similar moment.
Mm.
Well, and with that whole situation with Kick-Toad, so he's freed, but then he pretty much immediately goes back to his old ways, and that reminds me. I don't have the reference handy, but in the New Testament, whenever you have the I don't know if it refers to them explicitly as warlocks, but you have like the people that have power, sorcerers. When they decide to follow Jesus, the first thing they do is burn all of their books and materials. That way, there would be no going back, because for somebody like that who's already gone down that road and tried to give themselves to dark powers, like, that's going to be very attractive. You pretty much have to make that decision. Nope, there's no going back.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that, he made his effort. He tried to go and be part of the new world, but there was nothing for him. He said all these people had their own thing. There's nothing for me to do.
Yeah.
So, it's like where, again, the scriptures talk about, if you cast out an evil spirit, but then you don't bring in something in its place. You don't bring in the Spirit of God. He's just going to come back with 7 bigger, badder friends. And that seems what happened to Kick-Toad. They freed him.
Matthew 12:43-45, by the way.
Like I said, that's what happened to Kick-Toad. They're like, hey, we freed you. You helped us, overthrow this guy. Thanks. Well, bye. And so he ended up becoming the guy.
Well, and the other thing was, though, like, we don't know. We're kind of like you said, we're kind of getting the outline of the earlier stories, but there's no indication that like everyone cast him out, that everyone drove him away. But he had been around power. He had been, he had been working for someone very dangerous, very powerful. And now he was just another person, and he could have joined in at that. He could have said, okay, I'm nobody special now. That's okay. What can I do as who I am? But he wanted to be, but he didn't want that. He saw the prince being crowned, and he said, why does he get this? And he his ambition overtook him. Or at least, I think that's one way you could read
that. From this section, I also thought it was interesting. Donnergarm. It mentions that when they had met him before, the birds, I believe, referred to him as the only good werewolf in the world. And I thought that was interesting because you occasionally have, and we've discussed this before, where like once like dragons were considered to like all be evil, but at a certain point that sort of shifted, where it's like, well, maybe a dragon can change, or maybe a dragon can be good, which you kind of see in more modern things. And I feel like this sort of like turns it on its head,
and
because
maybe
like all werewolves are evil. Oh, but here's a good werewolf, but not really.
And maybe vampires can be sparkly and gay. Sorry, that was probably unnecessary.
But yeah, and it's kind of I kind of like how he didn't spare any didn't spare any mercy for the ones that had fallen to evil. Got like shredded to their bones by iron-beaked ravens, and Richard got dragged into the sea and devoured and drowned. It's like, man.
Well, and that's another thing that and this is another thing from the old stories. There's no such thing as a safe deal with the devil. Um, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of contract you make. It doesn't matter, what you think you're getting out of it. He will turn on you and destroy you. It's just a question of, how and how soon. And the deal that's pretty constant, and it's there are certain decisions I don't know, like there are certain deals you make and you can't really trust them anyway.
Yeah, the only time you should make a deal with the devil is if you are absolutely sure that you're the best fiddle player ever.
The legends do tell of one brave young boy.
That's the only time it actually works out.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the contract is based on trust and honesty, and if you're making a contract with the father of lies, well, okay.
So in chapter 5, he finds the book that Penny had brought back, and she has a note with it and explains, like, well, if you read it in this light, it'll show you this, and if you read it in the light of a full moon, it'll show you this, and by candlelight you'll see these. And one thing I found kind of interesting about that, I remember not that long ago reading a part of the Old Testament. I have read my way through the entire Bible once. It's been a while, although technically now that I'm Catholic, I haven't. But I have read my way through the Bible, and so I know I'd read this part, but it'd been a long, long time, and so I was reading this part of the Old Testament, and it's fascinating how much things change, the different things you see when you read something real, something solid, when you read something that matters and you go back to it years later, you're going to see things that you didn't see at all before. And there are books that don't work like that. There are books that you read it, if you read it once and you get it, you've gotten all there is, and there's no need to go back. But there are a lot of books where every time you come back to it, and the Bible is definitely one of these, every time you come back to it, you're going to see things there that you didn't see before. And it's I thought that was an interesting portrayal of how that can work.
Very true.
Yeah.
Not a lot to add to that one. It's like, yep, solid point. Well said.
Although I don't know if this shows up in like Chronicles of Narnia, but I know similar stuff shows up in Tolkien's work, like Lord of the Rings.
Oh, stuff. In The Hobbit, there was the map where different parts only showed up under the moon at different phases. So yeah, there is that as well. So let's see. The 6th chapter, he has the Night of Shadows, and it's the and he comes to the museum where the sword has been kept, and it's kind of he describes this museum, and there's like hubcaps from the 50s next to a suit of armor from the 12th century, from 12th century England, next to some knickknacks next to spear, next to a crown from from 12th century Germany, and just like complete junk thrown together with some of the most valuable things you can imagine. And it actually kind of reminds me of how like education in arts and literature is done today, because they haven't gotten rid of, or not entirely, gotten rid of all these great works of Shakespeare, Chaucer, of take your pick. They're still there, but they're like, oh, but we have to be multicultural, so we're going to throw them together with a book by a Chinese immigrant and an African fable, and all these things are the same, and none of them are better than anything else. And it's, in a weird way, it's almost more effective than just getting rid of them, because you just, it's all the same. There's nothing is more valuable than anything else. There's no standards. There's no nothing is more powerful, more necessary than anything else.
Yep. And so I like how it, rather than like, ennobling the junk, right? It cheapened, the treasure. Arg.
Yeah.
I said, but that whole scene in there, when he finally reads the name, I was like, oh, that makes sense. His name was Phobos. He's fear. The Great Shadow. My mom tells a story one time when we were kids that she saw fear, like the spirit thereof. They said he was huge, towering, menacing, thing. But then she realized he's a shadow. He can't actually touch you. He can't actually do anything. He can just make you afraid, make you, he said he can try and influence you to do things, but he doesn't actually have any motive force on his own. He's just a shadow. All he can do is fall over you. And so his battle with the shadow is also very interesting.
Well, and the other thing with that is, like, in order to win, he had to do two things. He had to kill Tybalt. He had to kill the cat, his friend, and he had to break this powerful magical sword, this sword of fire and light. And it's like, in both cases, you have to, the one, again, was an act of obedience, an act of faith, saying, not blind faith. He had a reason to trust Tybalt. He knew Tybalt. He trusted him, but it was faith. It was, I don't understand this. I can't make sense of it, but I have to go forward knowing, trusting you. And then, the other part, there's no other way. I don't know what to, he breaks the sword, and, he has part of it below him and part of it above him, and there's no place for the shadows. But at the same time, he just broke the sword. And then, there's the first half of the last chapter, and he's just sitting there, in this room full of mostly of junk, sitting there alone, and he is, he has an old broken sword and a dead cat, and it's like, what did I win? Is this my reward? what's going to happen to me now? Where is there for me to go? And it's really, it's fascinating and painful. And yeah, I don't know. Chris, what did you think of that? The fight, the big fight and its aftermath.
Well, with the big fight, him killing Tybalt, it's like I get the act of faith thing, but at the same time, like something still feels off about that because he's killing his friend and he's trusting him, but he's still hacking his friend's head off. And I'm not sure exactly what sort of symbolism or what's intended there.
Well,
It's
it's the
weird.
Abrahamic sacrifice, except for he went through with it. Or you could say that makes a proxy for God sending Jesus, right? You got to let me die.
I could see that, but
work.
he's actually like landing the killing blow. So I
Yep.
guess you could almost say he's representing like humanity itself, like as a whole in that moment. But that one's still awkward. The sword, I kind of understand, because with the sword, like he associates the sword with power. But the sword is kind of just a conduit for the power. It's not the power itself. So breaking the sword is showing faith in the source of the power and not the mere object. So that one makes a certain amount of sense to me. But this is one of those things where the little bit I knew about the Narnia series kind of messed me up, because I think I saw the first two movies in theaters. I don't really remember much from them, but I remember the whole like Aslan like sacrifice thing. So I had kind of assumed that a parallel version had happened to them. So when it happened sort of in that moment, that really threw me off.
Yeah, I do see how that is kind of weird and confusing. One thing I did like with the last chapter, this, towering beast with, flame, with lightning coming out of his mouth and these great, spreading wings, comes in, and, the first thing he says at this point is, don't be afraid. And it's like, oh, someone actually knows how angels show up. And so, because, today we think angels and we think, oh, what's that act? There was this series Touched by an Angel with the red-headed actress woman, and we think cute and what's that?
No.
And we think cute and warm and, fuzzy, and there may be times when they do that. I will not say that they are not, that is disallowed to them, but when you read the Bible, consistently the first thing they say when they show up is don't be afraid. And they have to say that because if you are genuinely meeting an angel, you're going to be scared out of your mind.
Well, if you know. Like, if you meet an angel in glory, who's there in glory, yeah, you're going to be like, oh my goodness. And then he's going to be like, hey, it's all right. Or he might be like, yes, Midianite, I'm here to kill you. But yeah, a lot of times, I mean, angels show up, incognito and people don't know, like Lot. Hey guys, if you stay out there, y'all are handsome, the whole town will come and rape you. Why don't you come stay at my place?
Right, and the fear of an angel, it can be different things, because on the one hand, it could be that there is a powerful being in front of you and you recognize the power. On the other hand, you could see it as a representative of God himself, and you realize how messed up you are. And whenever, a sinful being is forced to look at something holy, like, that's that's not going to end well for the sinful being most of the time. Like, that's a very scary position to be in. Perfection, face down perfection itself.
True.
So let's see. And so, the story ends with Tommy basically going off to be the wise old man who is going to guide, someone else, some from their world, a child into, a new set of adventures and a new way of learning about and fighting back against, corruption and evil. Which that is an interesting, I guess, promotion in itself. And that's not something you see. That's not something you see a lot. I guess if you read the whole Narnia series, you kind of get from the Magician's Nephew to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You kind of get a little bit of that, but since they weren't written in that order, especially, it's not exactly the same kind of thing. You don't see Gandalf as a little kid.
I don't think he ever was a little kid.
No, Gandalf
He was
is.
sent into the world as a spirit, and he took the form of an old man. Never said he grew up. He said, "I'm an old man now."
Gandalf is, in our terms, he would pretty much be an angel. And that was just the form he chose to, assume during his work in Middle Earth. But you don't see where these wise old mentors who are standing beside the hero but not doing the deeds themselves come from.
So this sort of creates an endless cycle, going from world to world.
Well, and that actually reminds me of something earlier from the story, and it was in chapter 4 with Sally, and he says, the story never ends, and that kind of reminds me, very different kind of story. It kind of reminds me of near the end of Watchmen, and what was Ozymandias turns to Dr. Manhattan and asks him, so, how will this turn out in the end? And he says, nothing ever ends. And, there is, the story just keeps going on. And that's also something we've got to remember, that what we do, doesn't just stop with us, doesn't just stop with our family, and doesn't just stop in our time. It can ripple out from us and be part of something much bigger, for better, or if we make the wrong choices, for worse. And very small decisions can have very big impacts either way.
Yep. And also as a message of hope, the story.
So
it's a message of hope, because if the story is never over, then the ending can always change. And so nothing is set in stone. The future is yet to come, and so you always got to fight, even if it looks hopeless, because you never know. When the wheel rolls over again, maybe the people that have watched you fight will pick up your cause next time around. It'll gain steam, and you can change the end, even if you never see it, or you can change the foregoing narrative, even if you never see it. That's why the Bible says, "Do not be weary in doing good." It says you may never see that harvest that you plant.
Well, and it's also
It'll come.
Well, and it's also, and C.S. Lewis points this out. One reason we can't do like like Ozymandias and Watchmen and do some terrible act of evil because it's going to make things, it's going to produce some good effect in the long run, we think, is because, for one thing, if the world ended tomorrow, that good we imagined is never coming. And so, if you stop at any point, all there is what you actually did. And the other thing is, like the end of Watchmen, you never, like, you don't really know the consequences. All you know is I did right or I did wrong at this moment. And, if you choose to do wrong because you think, oh, it'll make something else better if I do this one wrong thing now, it can spiral out in a way that you can't possibly imagine. And it's, yeah. So,
Sort of the moral divide.
it sounds like...
It's like the moral divide. You got the continental divide, of which at one point, a raindrop that falls goes into one sea, and then at the, an inch to the left, a raindrop that falls goes to the other. And so, you come to that moment, and kind of like what we discussed earlier with, when you're finally given over to your own desires and lusts, you never know what decision that's going to be. When did you actually hit the fork in the road and turn aside? Nearly they stood who fell kind of stuff. And, you never know. Is this decision to do this thing in hopes of doing good actually going to be where I turned off the path of good forever? Or is it going to be another place where I stumble? You can't know, and you can't risk it. Virtue.
So it sounds like we've mostly, covered the story. Chris, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to put in?
I think that was all.
Nate, anything else you wanted to cover?
I wonder if my cat, or, well, not my cat, I wonder if my wife's cat sees everyone as clearly as this cat did. If so, that's a little very interesting thing. I need to start to learn to talk to him. Gambit, is he a coward or a warlock or something? Meow. What does that mean? Meow. Huh. Fine then. Keep your secret.
To be fair, if you kill someone for being a warlock, the police probably won't take your cat's testimony very well.
At the same time, it sets you up for solid insanity plea. What, the cat told me he was an evil warlock bent on, installing, the reign of fear across the world. I had to kill him. I couldn't find my shining sword reforged, so I used a gat.
All right. Thank you guys for getting together with me tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the story on itself, and I hope it's been a good talk. And I will talk to you again soon. God be with you.
Have a good one.
Bye.